You're listening to Coding Blocks, episode 14. Subscribe to us and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcasting app.
And visit us at codingblocks.net where you can find show notes, examples, discussion, and more.
And send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net and follow us on Twitter at codingblocks, or head over to www.codingblocks.net and you can find our other social links at the top of the page there. And with that, welcome to Coding Blocks. I'm Alan Underwood.
I'm Joe Zach.
And I'm Michael Outlaw. And welcome to part 2. So, dear listener, as you heard in the last episode, we ran a little long. I'm sorry, I spoke too much. So we decided to cut that up into 2 episodes, and this is the continuation of databases.
But before we get to that, we do have a little bit of news. So Michael and I actually went to a really cool event the other day, Build Guild in Atlanta, which, how would you describe that, Michael?
It was just an opportunity to meet up with other technology-minded people and just have conversations around different technologies. You know?
At a place with beer, video games,
Well, okay.
and amazing French fries.
Yeah, okay. Well, we could say that part too.
But what was on the French fries? There was something special about these French
I don't know.
fries.
There was like some Uber hot sauce stuff on there.
It's got to be sriracha. There's got to be some sort of spicy mayonnaise. There's
And
definitely
fish.
There was seaweed, and then the fish skin.
There's
stuff.
definitely that
That
didn't
doesn't
belong.
sound tasty.
It was
to
like
me.
sushi on a French fry that was like really hot and spicy.
And it looked like human skin.
Yeah.
But I
But
don't
no,
know.
it was a really cool meetup though. I mean, it was originally, well, at least from like what I'd read about it, I had thought that it was gonna be like just strictly web-minded, 100%. But there were people that were there that were were from a server admin background, and then there were some that were from like PM role type, some from just desktop application type development. So there were you had all bases covered there.
There was even a recruiter who didn't try to get anyone's name
the recruiter.
or recruit
Really?
anybody, which is they were just really nice and normal.
They just wanted to hang out and
he
drink
didn't ask
beer.
for any cards. He
Yep.
didn't pass out any cards. It was like I was like, wow, this is the first.
That's really bizarre.
I don't know if that means, but
I think he was just there to hang out.
yeah.
So what was the predominant topic though of the night? Like, was there any
there was
any
no
one
predominant
theme?
topic.
I would say tales of woe.
Oh, really?
There was a
went-
lot of commiseration.
yeah.
In what regard?
Like, people talked about troubles they had with like maybe Mongo or
different pain points of whatever
hosting.
technology stack you're using, name it.
Yep.
Those pain points were discussed at one point.
So that's pretty interesting because I mean that's fairly consistent. Then like there's nobody that's just basking in the glow of any one particular technology, or no?
Definitely not.
Okay.
No, and like all of the tech, there was a pretty widespread, in regards to like the different technologies used, different technology stacks and languages, whatnot. There was pretty much good representation there.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you go to a meetup and you end up like hanging out afterwards and talking a little bit, or sometimes you go get drinks afterwards. It was basically that, but the whole time. So it was just really cool, like talking with people who have similar interests.
Yeah. So it wasn't like your normal meetup where you might go to like listen to a presentation on something where you're trying to learn something. This was all about just the more the networking part
Tech
of
talk,
it.
right?
Yeah, just
Basically.
meeting with other people, networking.
I hated I
and
missed
talking
it.
about
I was supposed to go, and I wasn't able to.
It was a good time.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. Also, I just read this today. I haven't actually tried this yet, but we mentioned .peak a while back. It's a really nice free decompiler. And what I just read today is that it can function now as a symbol server with version 1.2, which means that you can take your DLL that you don't have the source code for, so maybe say some sort of game that you can get on Steam, and you can decompile it to get the code. And now instead of recompiling and trying to run that, you could just go ahead and run the .peak as a SQL as a server symbol, so you can actually debug that application while it's running with the source code that you just obtained from the compiled code. That's just amazing.
That is pretty amazing, and kind of scary.
Yep.
Your code is not safe.
Yeah. And I imagine 64-bit applications are a little bit weird, but 32 you can change stuff, you can change constants, you can tweak stuff, see what happens.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to bring up that's actually about a month old now, but in case anybody had not heard of this, there is a site called CodeSpaces, and I believe it was yes, it was www.codespaces.com, and it was like your GitHub or Bitbucket or anything like that, but it was a paid source code repository. So the reason I want to bring this up is not necessarily because it's new news, but because the way apparently that they were taken down is they let somebody into their AWS admin, not knowingly, but they didn't have it locked down. They didn't have it locked down with multi-factor authentication or anything like that. So somebody was actually able to gain access to it and basically hit the delete button on everything they had.
Well, I think there were a couple of takeaways from their experience. One of them had to do with security. So
Huge.
Strong passwords, multi-factor authentication everywhere you can. I know I'm a fan. But also too, like from the developer point of view, another personal takeaway from that though was, it's one thing to have a backup of your code, right? But you also got to think about like, well, what if that backup were to go down? So, there is something to be said about having, some resiliency there across your backups.
Yeah, because from what I understand, they were running completely on AWS, so they had backups, but their backups were from within their same AWS console.
Yeah,
so,
but I mean, like you, the developer, though, if that's
right.
if CodeSpaces was your only place.
Oh yes,
right. Then so they say the rule about backups is to have one on site and one off site, right? So if that's your off site backup, as long as you had another one on site, that might not be such a problem. But if you are only relying on a third party like whether it be Frog Creek or CodeSpaces or somebody like that, right? Like if you're relying 100% on them, or God forbid if something were to happen to like a GitHub, well, they're probably they're pretty big, but you know what I mean though.
Yeah, you are responsible for your data ultimately. So no matter who it is, how big they are, it's your data. If it means something to you, you need to protect it.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. I was thinking about from the opposite end, if you're the person creating a service like that and you're trying to make backups, if you're doing it in AWS, you should probably have multiple different accounts, all with MFA, right? So that you're backing up across different zones and different accounts, or back up into another solution, whether it be an on-site set of drives or something. That, like, you really need to think about whatever you're doing, making sure that you're resilient, especially if you have paying customers. I mean, it's dangerous, but security is definitely a huge thing. So,
I think I said frog. I meant fog.
Fog Creek, yeah.
Fog Creek.
So that was just something I want to bring up. It's not necessarily, like I said, new news, but it's still news that people are feeling. So,
yeah, And also, actually, just remembered this. I went to a really great OWASP meetup that we have here in Atlanta, and they were actually talking about. I didn't even know this existed, but there's a OWASP mobile top 10, which same thing like web applications that we talked about in episode 4, except it's actually the top 10 vulnerabilities found on mobile apps. And there was a new there was a new number 10 this year, which was mobile code hardening. So there are actually a number of exploits and things you can do if you can decompile the code and put it up in like a free app store. So if you partake in of a jailbroken phone and you go to free app stores because you want to get a hacked game or a free game or something else, then there's a lot of bad stuff that you can do. And I got to see just a really great presentation. I'll have a link to that so you can kind of see if that's something you're interested in.
So I didn't get to attend, but I'm curious though. Out of the top flaws that talked about, they might not have been specific. Maybe they weren't specific to operating systems. But I was curious as to like were the majority of them specific to any like Android or iOS versus
So the actual OWASP project looks at both. But in this case, it actually dealt with the binary after it was packaged. So they looked at the top 100 the top 100 paid apps in both the iOS and the main Google Android store, and they found that 100% of the Android apps had been decompiled and put up on a couple different free app stores, and it was like 86% of the iOS ones. So it was more common in Android. But it was not much better.
But maybe, you mean hacked?
Yeah, maybe I didn't say my question correctly because I wasn't referring specifically to the one about the. I think you said it was the 10th one on the list about the hacked app store. If you had a hacked device, but I meant like of all of the things to be aware of in regards to mobile devices, did the majority of them tend to swing to one particular mobile operating system over the other one?
From what I gather, looking at the top 10, and I've only looked at the top 10, briefly. I really just kind of focused on the last one at the meetup. But it looks to be really agnostic, so they really don't talk much about one or the other. It's more about like kind of the general purposes or problems that both have. So like, in OWASP, it's SQL injection, not like SQL injection in PHP or something specific.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting because you hear so much about as how secure iOS is, as an example, right? Compared to Android, and then this week, this week, there was the announcement from LastPass, and one of their vulnerabilities that they had mentioned was specific to a feature implemented primarily for iOS, which was the bookmarklet.
Right.
Say that bookmarklet feature.
And if you guys aren't listening to Security Now, you should check it out. It's an awesome podcast, and it's just fantastic. It's long too, so that's like an hour, 2 hours of my week every week.
Yeah,
but it's worth it.
Yeah, well spent.
Yeah, so I want to give a thanks to Skinner MW. We got our 15th 5-star review and write-up in iTunes, so thank you very much. We would love to have number 16 and 17, but in the meantime, I do want to give a thanks to the Skinner here. And I can't help but wonder, like, is that like really a name, or is this like a callback to like Principal Skinner? Like, what's happening there?
Yeah.
Any
Some
thoughts?
people just get lucky with last names, as you well know.
Yes.
Me? I would know.
Yeah,
Okay.
Outlaw, man.
Yeah.
Like Outlaw and Apple. We always talk about Translessing.
Right.
It's awesome.
Tell it like it is, Jay-Z.
Yes.
And
Mr.
also,
Frank Underwood.
Right.
Great, I'm so jealous. But we also got a really nice comment from Jim Basillo on www.codingblocks.net/episode 12. And he had that's one where we talked about kind of what we wanted to be when we grow up, and we talked a little bit about C# versus Java, and he's just got a really nice opinion on that. And he's using Java, and he's done some .NET type stuff, but he's been using Spring Boot and is really liking it. And he's actually just got a really nice comment that you guys should go over to episode 12 and read, and I'd like to hear your side of the opinion too. So
Yeah, and we're going to link to that in the show notes as well as this next one. And so you can either go there or you can go to this episode and check it out.
Well, before you go on to the next one, though, I did want to say that I really did appreciate the tone, though, in Jim's
absolutely
comment there, because it wasn't, so often, unnecessarily so, there's this battle between, languages like it matters, but he really took the time and put in some really well worded response.
Post.
Yeah, that it really made you sit back and think like, oh yeah, those are some great points that he made there.
Yeah, I mean, some of the points were like the link that he brought up that he loves in C#, but that Java 8 now has lambdas. Like he really did put a lot of time into this, and it's a fairly long write back. So again, it was an excellent write up.
One of the I guess like the an overall premise to his comment there though was that for him, one of the things that he didn't like about working in .NET, and maybe I'm restating this wrong, you tell me, but was that he felt that you were at the mercy of Microsoft. Whatever they dictated, right, that was the way it was going to go, right? And it wasn't like the community decided things, and that's what he liked about in the Java world is like, yeah, you might have 1,000 different options to implement some logging framework, right? But the community as a whole will filter through those until eventually you get to, well, here's the top one or two, and pretty much the community is going to standardize on this one.
Right? Yeah, and basically
and
all the
what
features,
he liked about it.
Yeah, all the features end up getting implemented into one or two that everybody loves. So yeah, it was a really interesting take on that. I mean,
But yeah, I mean, not. I guess like my summation of it though almost sounds like a disservice to Microsoft, because I do think they take some feedback from the community as well, though. So
they do, and I'd say, like, generally speaking, most people are pretty happy with a lot of the products that Microsoft puts out because they're pretty well baked, at least by the second or third revision, right? So, again, a very thoughtful post, and we all appreciate you taking the time to put it up there.
Yep. Thanks.
Yep. And then the next guy, Tron Anderson, he's actually left us feedback before, and always very good feedback. And this one was in regards to the recursive table or query stuff that we talked about in episode 13. And he gave a link that we'll include in the show notes to where he said he implemented a closure table given this method. And unfortunately, none of us have actually read it. We just saw the feedback a minute ago, but we're going to put that up there, and we'll all be taking a read through it as well. So definitely appreciate that as well, Tron. Thanks. All right, so let's get into the basics then. Let's talk about the types of joins. So what do we got?
My favorite is Crossjoin. I never get to use it, and when I do, it's kind of cool. I want to show somebody like, hey, check it out. I actually needed a cross-join.
So a cross-join, for those of you out there, is basically a join that has no predicate, and it creates a Cartesian product. When would you want to do something like this?
Whenever I want everything in one table mixed with everything in another. So if I wanted like maybe all the different combinations of, if I had like
can we just say it's like doing two select statements in one?
No.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that.
No. So an example that I was thinking of is if you have 24 hours in a day and you need a table that is going to say, all right, Monday through or Sunday through Saturday, I need Sunday to give me 1 through 24, but I don't want to have to create this table on the fly. I don't want to have to write the code to create this table. You can do a Cartesian product where you say, all right, select everything from this table, which is going to give you Sunday through Saturday, so your 7 records. And then you're going to do a cross join with a table that has the numbers 1 through 24. And so now you literally have a record for each day of the week with each hour, right?
Yep. So you say cross join, and you order by day, order by hour, and boom.
Yeah, now you have Monday 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, blah blah blah. Tuesday,
yeah,
1,
but I'm
2,
saying
3.
like you're still you're the two tables. You're basically getting the results of the two tables in one combined set. Is what I meant.
But you can't really do two selects because it's not just the days and 1 through 24. It's every day 24 times.
Yeah. You were basically saying, all right,
okay,
everything in
fair
this
enough.
table has to
Fair
go
enough.
to every one of these records in this table. Yeah, so it's a Cartesian product. It's every possible combination from A to B. So that's what a cross join is, and they're fantastically fun, and can bring your entire database server down.
Oh, and so what happens if you cross join a table that has like the days of the week and a table that has nothing in it?
Nada.
I don't know if that's true. I'd have to write this, but I was wondering if I had my hour tables, there were no records in it. Would it just show me Monday to, the Sunday through Saturday, or would it just be null?
I really don't know. I don't think you get anything back.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like you would, because to me, like I always thought of cross product as being like or cross join as being like the kind of granddaddy of all the other joins, and the rest of them just kind of deal with with the where clause or the on clauses. But now I don't know. I'm gonna have to Google this one while we're talking.
Doggone it! I was actually gonna type it in, but I don't have a SQL Server up and running right now. All right, so that's one. How about you, Michael? What's your favorite?
I just do a normal join. I don't do anything crazy like that. Like
you don't type enter or anything?
No, like
Just
rarely.
join?
No, I just type in a plain join normally.
Explicit is
that,
best.
Is that bad?
Oh, come on.
No,
I actually got into a heated debate with somebody about typing inner versus outer. I don't care. Leave it off. I don't want to type as much. So, which way? So, Michael's talking about an inner join.
Yeah, I mean, like normally, if I need to do anything crazier than that, I'm already like, whoa, wait, what am I doing?
Oh, come on.
Let me rethink this.
All right, we'll revisit. But what's an inner join get you?
I probably don't even need to bother.
So what's an inner join get you?
Oh, great! I didn't know I was going to be tested.
Oh yeah, come on.
So, well, that's where you are providing a filter on it. So, a predicate on it to join one column's values specifically on the column from one table specifically on the column from another table, and you're only getting the results where those two match.
So it basically throws away all the records where there's not a direct
right.
match. Yep. So that's your inner join. And then the other type of join is an outer join. And you have your left outer joins and your right outer joins. And personally, I hate right outer joins. They do the same thing. But if you're mixing that in with your left joins, and you're really just going to confuse people.
Yeah, just swap the tables around.
Yeah, seriously. Make them all left joins.
Well, actually, there's a third type of outer join there.
Across
it's the full outer join.
Yes,
outer
I was
join,
about to bring
yes.
that one up.
And that's the one that I was talking about earlier where, if you've got one table of stuff and the other one doesn't, and this one will bring it back. A cross join will not. So in that example where you have no hours, but you do have the Saturday through Sunday,
Yep.
you're going to get nothing from the cross join, but you're going to get the days for the full outer join.
Good call. Yeah, so to understand the full outer join better, let's talk about the left join or the right join. On a left outer join, which I write left join because it's fairly obvious, but a lot of people like to write left outer. What that is if you have records in the first table, let's say 1, 2, 3. In the right table, let's just say that you only have one. If you say left select star from A, left join B, on this column, you're going to get all 1, 2, 3 back from the left table, but in the right table, because you only had the one in there, you'll get one back where it meets with the one from the left table, but the other two columns will be null, or the other two rows will be null because there was no record that matched. So a left join basically says, give me everything in the left table in this expression, and if it's not in this right table, just leave it null, but if it had a record, go ahead and fill it in with the data that was there. So that's your left join. The right join is the same exact thing except flip it around. It's going to grab everything from the right table where your records exist, and then anything in the left table that didn't match is just going to leave null, but it will give you back a record. And so the full outer join that Joe just mentioned is kind of the combination of the two. Anything that's in the left table is going to return you back. If it's not in the right table, it'll give you a null value for that record. And it'll give you back everything in the right table, and anything that was in the left table that didn't exist for it will give you a null value. So you get the full complement.
Yeah. And speaking of weird stuff, what do you guys think about normal forms? I know what normalized means to me. If I say that a table's normalized, I mean it means to me that I basically got rid of anything that would be duplicated in that table. So, like an example would be if we've got an employee table and a manager table, and the manager's got an employee ID and the employee has a manager ID, that would not be normalized. That's an example where these things have a reference we need to update in two places whenever you change that relationship. But I know there's like first normal, second normal, third normal forms, and that's where my knowledge just stops.
Yeah, that gets in, like getting into those levels of normality for databases. It seems like it goes into things like data warehousing where they break apart like a date time field. And so it gets kind of ridiculous when you get into first normal form. Like they'll break it apart from the hours to the minutes to the seconds. Those will be 3 different fields in a table. And so there's places for that. But I think third normal form is what most people work in, right?
Right.
Where the quickest example I can think of is if you had something like a product and you have a product type column, right? If in newbie situations when we all first started, we probably had, this is a motherboard, and so in the type column you would have motherboard listed for every single row, right?
1 or 0, right?
Yeah. So the way the you could either do that, or you might have just typed in motherboard for the type, where in a normal form you would move the product type into its own table, give it an ID. So motherboard would be type 1, and so then in that product table itself, for product type ID, you would have 1 for the motherboard, right? So that's when you start normalizing data. You're basically trying to get duplicates out of the table that aren't searchable duplicates.
Yeah, if you really want to hurt your brain, you can go into Wikipedia and look at the database normalization there, and they go all the way down to like the 6th normal form.
Wow.
And
too much.
Yeah, beyond that, I was like, all right, you lost me. I'm out. I'm done. And this is where, like, the guys that are really interested in data, in databases, this is where like they're all into it versus the guys that are, more interested in coding aspect. That's where we are, is like, okay, we're done.
Yep, and there's actually a guy I follow on Twitter named his Twitter handle is SQL Chris, SQLKRIS, and he actually has been really open when I've had questions. So he's let me bug him, so maybe he'll let you bug him too. I'm kind of nominating me here, so sorry, SQL Chris.
Well, he put himself out there. He's got a blog on database stuff. So.
All right.
Now, with that, I will say, a lot of people will say, "Oh, everything needs to be in normalized form or whatever." That's true to a certain degree. If you're writing reports, it makes a lot of sense to create pre-compiled tables for reports. And those are not going to be normalized. You're bringing all the data in so that you can basically just spit it back out without doing a bunch of grouping and all that kind of stuff. So, in that regard.
Yeah, normal is definitely above my head.
Well, when you get into like the 6th degree of separation, I feel like Kevin Bacon is going to jump in.
But one thing I hate is talking about motherboards.
All of a sudden, your data gets footloose.
You'll see like an is motherboard column, and then right next to it, you'll see like a motherboard type next to it, right in the column, and then the table will have stuff other than motherboards. So for like 3/4 of those records, those motherboard is 0 and the motherboard type is null.
Right.
And so you end up just getting this really junked up table.
Or it's an empty string in SQL Server.
And generally speaking, that's bad design. Yeah. That's actually really bad design. Like if the whole purpose of designing tables is you want to create a table that's almost always going to have a value in every single column, right? And that's when you've mostly gotten a normal form that you need to be in, at least from a transactional point of view. If you have this situation where is motherboard, is CPU, is memory, then you've probably designed it wrong and need to go back and take a look at that.
Yeah, but refactoring databases is hard because you usually have to change the code around the same time. And if you've got an application that's up 24/7, then you got a problem.
Yeah, refactoring a database is not easy at all. From the database perspective, it is.
Right.
But for all the applications that work with it,
yeah, you got to coordinate.
Yeah, it can be a real job.
You got to coordinate. Well, yeah, I mean, it almost begs the question of, this wasn't really the topic per se, but in regards to like abstracting the data away from your application, what's the best route to go there then so that those database changes won't have the impact on your code?
Oh, that goes to application layers, right? Like your DAL and your...
Yeah, be backwards compatible.
Well, as an example, this was many years ago. I was on one project in particular where...
But wait, you're only 21, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was in high school. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yes.
Jerk. So it wasn't that many years ago. But we were on a project, and as a design principle, I don't even know who made the decision, but it was decided that access anything that you were going to do to the database, whether it be any kind of CRUD operation, regardless of the type, it was going to be done through a stored procedure, and only the stored procedure would know the intimate details of the database. So that's one way that the abstraction was dealt with in that regard. So if it came time to refactor your database, as in the example that you brought up, right, then as long as the stored procedure takes the same inputs and returns the same output, you're good.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense actually.
It's so annoying to work with though. You update the table, you update the proc, you update the code. Repeat.
But you don't update the code.
You don't update the code in that.
That was the
regard.
point.
Well, if you add a column.
Oh, yeah. Okay, fair enough.
Well, okay, but
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I guess it's just one more step. Not a big deal.
But I will say the only place where that fails, and we've had discussions around this before, is if your database or if the data for your application depends on two sources of data, then that may not work. So it's pulling from one database and maybe another database somewhere else. It's pulling from an HR type thing, a PeopleSoft database or something, and then your application database. You can't put everything in the stored proc unless you set up link servers and all kinds of stuff. But
okay, so excluding the multiple database kind of weird scenarios, which then might
multiple
even
server
beg other questions like, well, maybe you shouldn't be doing those type of queries. Another way, just thinking off the top of my head that you might be able to do this too, to solve this abstraction layer, would be through views, the use of views, so that only the views would know the true
If it has
structure
access,
of the tables behind it.
if it has access to the external server, yeah.
Okay. Well, again, you're bringing up that weird example.
Yeah, yeah. But I will say that brings up another thing. Like you can join tables between databases on the same server, and quite often people do that. So
Whether it's
This
a good thing or
is
not is
not a
another
good
question.
thing, though.
yeah, you should probably have schemas within the same database, but you can join tables from multiple databases.
I mean, I
across
can
the-
drive a car with my feet. Doesn't mean that I should do it that way.
Right.
Well, I kind of do.
I mean, I'm talking about the steering.
Okay, fair enough.
But, actually, just talking about database design made me think about something. We didn't really talk about cardinality much, but there's this notion in database design of like one-to-one and one-to-many. And a one-to-one relationship would be something where like my employee table has a manager ID field. There can only be an employee can only have one manager, and there's this notion of a one-to-many where like a manager can be associated with multiple employees. So what I think is an interesting question is, what about one-to-one relationships where I've got a table and I've got 3 or 4 fields that are, or, maybe even one that's only applies to certain situations, like say that motherboard description. So to me, like I kind of want to have a table that's like product motherboard information or something, and it's got a product ID and the motherboard description in there, and it's associated with the product. So the product can only have one, and theoretically I could put that column into the table, but I don't like to do that because to me it's a separate logical entity, but I know a lot of people have different opinions on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That kind of came up. That was something I asked about at lunch the other day, is that exact topic. So essentially what you're talking about is the equivalent of having a subclass in a programming language. So you have a product class, and then you have a motherboard, which is a subtype of the product class, right? So in SQL, you're talking about having a product table and then a subtype of motherboard, right? So you have a separate motherboard table. That one's interesting and kind of hard to... I can't make any great arguments for or against it. Performance-wise, it would be awesome because you literally have a small subset of records. The good thing is you break it out into a separate table. You don't have a bunch of nulls in your product table for the motherboard type, right?
Right, and you avoid these tables that have like 70 columns, which are probably harder to do other stuff with.
Okay, but this is what gets back to my article I wrote, where this is the exact direction I was thinking about was, okay, so do you do that? Do you have a bunch of subtype tables, which, by the way, is going to be a royal pain in the butt because you're going to have to manage it all through your application somehow. So if you create a new subtype, you're going to have it generate your create table scripts, manage that stuff so that if anything changes, your application needs to then be able to go in and modify the database stuff, generate your views, generate everything so that it knows how to get this data, right?
Yep.
So the other alternative is what I had in my article, to where you create a characteristic type table so that you have a product table, and then you can assign as many attributes to it as you want. You can say it is a motherboard. All right. It is, and then I can add a description for this. And so you can create as many as you want, but now you're creating a bunch of rows to fill that need that you were talking about just for having a motherboard table.
Yep.
So we've described scenarios where you have one table that goes wide with a lot of columns.
Yep.
We've described scenarios where you have small. You have in the example that you just gave, where your select for the product might be a long list.
Yep.
Of attributes, so it goes long instead of wide,
And number of rows.
in regards to the number of rows. And then you have the other scenario, which is the Joe provided, which is short and short
And separated.
but a lot of tables,
A ton of tables.
which seems like it would become unruly.
I think that's kind of like what WebSphere and those things do, though, right? Like everything you do generates like its own set of tables to manage them. So
Not exactly.
not completely.
No.
Okay. Hey, I've
No,
heard that.
I wouldn't put WebSphere in that same light.
I'm not certain, but it does really. So what he brought up was kind of the whole struggle I was having with designing something was what Joe mentioned, having a sub type table. Performance would be off the charts. It'd be fantastic because you're doing simple joins. maintainability.
That and you would also have like, there would be a small amount of data in those tables too.
Right.
But yeah, as you were about to say, I don't want to steal your thunder, but
No, you're good.
Maybe I will. Yeah, it just seems like it would be a nightmare to deal with that. And like, as soon as a new product came out, well, it's slightly different.
Yep.
So is that difference enough to warrant this new table?
New table, right?
Or do you mix it in and just know like, okay, that's the one special case? And because that's the danger. Because as soon as you introduce that, well, this is the one special case, then there's always going to be a second. Okay, well, we'll have two special cases.
It's a slippery SQL slope.
Yeah, and so I mean, I'm really not a fan of doing it that way.
It's tough, but here's the downside to the way that I talked about. The characteristic way, if you do that, it is infinitely scalable as far as the kind of attributes you can add to a product. However, your query performance is going to take a major hit way on down the road when you have 10,000 products in your database, and each one of those products now has 20 attributes. So 10,000 times 20, you're up into the 200,000 realm records, and that's not even that much. But that's where it all kind of gets hairy. That is extremely flexible.
But that's if you're trying to do a scenario where you want to get back every product with every one of its attributes, right?
Not even that.
That's where your 200,000 came from, though.
So let's say that you do some sort of query in your application to say, all right, give me all the products that are under this category. So now you got back, let's say 1,000 products, and each one of these has 20 records associated. You just grab back 20,000 records. What really should have just been, 1,000. You know what I'm saying? So you either have to creatively do this through your application to where you can get back these attributes and form them some sort of way to where you're not dealing with 20,000 records versus, and again, that's why I wrote the article that I started putting together was, man, it's real sweet. And I could write an interface or I could write a user interface real quickly to deal with attributes. I don't think I could quickly write any kind of user interface to do the multiple table thing. Like I don't even know how I'd do it and make it workable. So I don't know. It's a dangerous one.
True. Well, we talked about joins a little bit. There are also some set operators which are kind of similar a little bit, except different. So the one I was thinking about right now is basically union. And I was thinking that's almost like, we talked about horizontal and vertical. It's kind of like vertically joining two data sets. So it actually like appends the rows from one into the other.
Yep.
There's also union all. I'm not really sure the difference between union and union all. I just know that I always use union all.
Okay, so here's the only difference between them. If you use union by itself, it does a distinct. If you do union all, if you have, let's say that you had Michael, Alan, and Joe, right? And then you had another table that had Michael, Alan, and Joe.
First.
There we go. Yeah. So you union that table to another table, you're only going to get by Michael, Alan, and Joe. If you did a union all, you get Michael, Alan, Alan, Joe. So that's the only difference. Union will get rid of
multiplied.
I wonder. I wonder which one is more performant.
Oh, geez, I wonder.
Well, I would think that the one that's distinct because it's less stuff, right? But, I don't know.
No, actually, it depends. So here's the deal. With Union, if you have a very wide data set coming back, think about it like this. If you have 50 columns coming out of that and you do a union on another 50 column, it's essentially doing a group by on every one of those columns. So it can be really expensive. Now, depending on what you're doing, the union all may not be as effective because you might be getting back, 1,000,000 records as opposed to 1,000 if there were a bunch of, duplicated data between the tables. So it depends on the situation, but typically, generally speaking, if you have a very wide data set with a lot of columns, the union is going to be less performant.
Yeah, I just looked up SQLauthority.com, which is an awesome website for, I'm sure if you've done any sort of Googling around SQL, you've been to this website and you'll recognize the guy instantly.
Oh my God. I was picturing it in my head.
Yeah, but
Wait a minute, I've seen that guy's face, right?
His name's Penal Dave.
Is this the site that you're going to be referring to? And it is.
Yeah. And he actually, he's got a little thing here about union all, and he does say that union all is faster, which is kind of funny. We've actually talked about this problem before of like finding distinct elements in two different lists, and we kind of came up with a hacky way, or someone came up with a hacky way of converting the list to a hash table and then looping through that as a way of getting the actual algorithm complexity down. but it looks like it isn't doing that particular algorithm. So maybe there's a efficiency patch we can submit to SQL Server here. I doubt it.
So a couple of other set operators are except and intersect. And except is kind of interesting because what it does is it says, give me everything in table A except anything that shows up in table B. So if you have, again, Michael, Alan, and Joe in there, and Michael's the only one in table B, we're basically just going to give you back Alan and Joe. Because we say, we don't want this in the data set if it was in both tables. Intersect says, okay, no, just give me everything that is in between the two. And this one's interesting because intersect is literally the same thing as joining on every single column. If you're going to write a join, essentially, you are basically saying, all right, everything that was in table A and has the exact same data in table B, give me back just those rows. So in the previous example where all three of us were in the first table and Michael's in the second table, if you did that intersect, you're only going to get Michael back because he was the only one that was in both. So those are ways of doing set-based operations to get data back.
But it does kind of make you want to beg the question of like, so okay, let's focus in on the intersect and the except, right? Because these sound on the surface like operations that were going back to the left join, right join type operation. So it makes you want to beg the question like, hey, wait a minute. Why am I not just sticking to the join syntax? Why am I bringing in something else?
The only reason I can give you for that is you don't have to write all the join predicates. That's really it. So, and you're also, the other good thing is you're not having to say, okay, give me first name from table A only. So if you did a select all and you did the join, you're going to get the duplicated columns in your data set in columns, right? So you'll have first name from table A and first name from table B. If you do intersect, you're just getting first name from the two tables that were intersected together. You're just getting one column. And then the other thing is, let's say that you have first name, last name, age, whatever. If you're doing the join, you're going to have to say where A dot first name equal B dot first name, and B dot last name, and A dot last name equal B dot last name, and A dot age equal B dot age. If you do the intersect, you just say, hey, select first name, last name, and age from table A, intersect, select first name, last name, age from table B. Done. It gives it back to you. So your syntax gets a lot shorter, and you're not having to write all the join predicates. That's it.
Yeah, interesting. I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, totally. Maybe that's why I've never written an except or intercept. Intersect.
But Alan does it in all of his CTEs.
No, I don't do those in CTEs.
Just kidding.
All right, so then let's talk about some aggregation. So,
and this is awesome because this is going to come up in every single job interview you ever have that deals with SQL.
It really will. And this is here's your golden nugget for the day. So what's the difference between a having and a where clause?
It's kind of hard to explain, isn't it, in words? But so when I think about having, I know there's got to be a group by, and group by kind of aggregates my data. Like how do you explain a group by?
That's pretty much it. Like the answer is a having has to be used with a group by.
It happens
but
after the group by.
Doesn't have to include a having.
Doesn't have to have a having, but it's the only time you can use one is if there is a group by.
Yeah, so I can tell you when I use the having, if I say select star from sorted table or, select some column and comma count star, I group by that column and then I say having count greater than 1 or 2 or something like that.
Having's like a where clause for the aggregation though. So you're typically doing your where on, like you said, count star greater than 1 or max something less than 5. Who knows? But yeah, that's all it is a where clause using your aggregations.
So what is the group by? Like, how do you explain what a group by does?
A group by
magic.
It's like when you need it. It's one of those things like
the final countdown starts playing and you see Arrested Development in the background.
So
magic.
I know for me, I think if I've got a table full of users and I want to know how many Johns I have in that table, then I would do group by first name, and that's going to give me a distinct list of all the names because I'm grouping by all the values. So it basically squashes all those Johns into one John, and then I can do a comma and count star, and it'll tell me how many records were squashed. So it'll tell me I had 77 Johns.
Yep. That's
a
it.
lot of bathrooms.
So the group by is really just a way of aggregating information, right? I mean, that's it, and to say that just flat out probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but
You'll know it when you need it.
yeah, exactly. Hey,
Yeah,
I mean, if
you will
you
come
need,
across a situation where you want to do exactly this, and you will remember this podcast, and you will do it.
yeah, if you just go back to the standard math though, your averages, your maxes, your mins, your counts, that all those things can be accomplished with a group by. But you have to choose the columns that you want to do. So, like he said, if you want to count the number of Johns in there, cool, do that. If you want to find out who has the max salary in a table, you can just say select star. Actually, let's say maybe you wouldn't just want to do the table because you just did select max from the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do it group by name, though, you could possibly find out which name has the max salary. So
You can't group by star. I
cannot
feel like
group-
you should be able to group by star. I know everyone's in here has been in a situation where they group by everything.
Well, no.
No, it really doesn't make sense,
the
does it?
example that I find more frustrating when I want to use the group by though is that like maybe I want to do a select star and then just say but group that star by this
Right.
field,
yeah,
and
you
that's the
can't do it.
scenario that it's like but now I have to go and specify everything else before the group by works.
Yeah,
Yeah, if I'm joining table A to table B and I'm counting the records that are associated in table B, I should be able to say group by A dot star. Am I wrong?
it would make life a lot easier.
Yep.
Yeah, so the group by is just that, and your having is what we said, your where clause for your aggregations.
Well, the group returns it and it makes the select a smaller set of rows.
Yeah, like you said,
Right.
it squashes them
And
together.
then the having is just a predicate on the grouping to filter that result to a smaller set.
By aggregations, yes.
So if I can use group by to squash something, then why use distinct? If I could say, equivalently, this SQL statement is the same. Select distinct first name or select first name group by first name.
Those both do the same thing. However, if you wanted to get the count star, then you
gotta
have to
group.
do the group by. You can't.
So
use
it's
the
better
distinct.
to group. It's more flexible. You
It's
have
more
to-
flexible.
less maintenance.
But just to go back for a moment, though,
But-
the having though that you said you didn't have to use aggregation.
That's what it's used for. So because the thing is, you can use a where clause also with your select.
Okay,
So-
I see where you're saying like useful for, but my point was that it doesn't have to be used for.
Yeah, probably not have to be, but that's typically what you use it for. Your where clause will narrow down your data set, and your having filters out your aggregations.
Yeah, so if you want to find something where there's more than two rows that have well, going back to maybe your manager, if you want to find all managers that have more than 5 employees, that's an example where I've done a having where I'm trying to find like things that have more than X number of something.
So having count star greater than 5.
Yeah, I mean that's an example.
But going back to what you said with the distinct and the group by, there are cases where you want to use count distinct, right?
Right.
So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're like, well, I want to know the total number of unique names in the database, as opposed to the total number of Johns, I want to know the total number of unique names, you would say count distinct F name, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I think of distinct being like whenever I see
Why you got
distinct,
F somebody's name? Man? That ain't nice.
whenever I see distinct in a query, I automatically think that they're covering up some sort of mistake. So a lot of times you'll see people write a query and they'll have a join that's messed up somewhere, and so when they're testing it, they'll see 2 rows come back when they expected 1, and like, well, I don't know what's going on. SQL's got a bug, and so they put a distinct on it and it fixes it.
I'm
Quote
pretty
unquote.
sure that's what that word's for, though.
Unfortunately, I think you were probably right on the money with that assessment.
It's the one magical SQL keyword that
Yeah.
fixes all your queries' problems.
Wait,
yeah. So whenever you see something weird, just put a distinct in there and move on.
I had 5 rows, now I have 1. It worked.
Yeah.
All right, so
Magic.
all right, the next thing, oh, dude, one thing that drives me crazy is the different methods of getting things out of different databases. Like, by far, my favorite row number feature exists in Oracle. You just use Rownum. Every data set that comes back, it creates its own virtual column that's Rownum. So if you want to say, hey, give me all the rows, paging is a perfect example in applications, right? I want products 20 through 30. Where Rownum between 20 and 30. Done. You're done. You don't even think about it anymore. SQL Server since 2005 added the row number function, which essentially will give you the same type thing. It's not quite as pretty, but you can do some sweet stuff with it.
Now, what are you doing with Rownum?
Huh?
You're doing some CTA stuff there, aren't you?
No.
CTA.
CTA.
We're like on a whole nother level.
Sorry, it's past 10, man. I just started yelling.
Joe's about to fall out over there. No. So with Rownum and Oracle, it's just so easy.
No, but he's talking like if you wanted to do paging though.
Yeah. So think about it. You're on Google, right? You're on page 1. It gives you results 1 through 10. Well, you want to go to page 2. You just say, hey, where results were, or were Rownum between 10 and 20 or 11 and 20.
You said MySQL, you do like the limit 0500 or limit 501.
Actually, MySQL is disgusting. I found a site that actually showed the hacks for it. It actually made me want to cry.
You don't like? I like that. I always get confused about which one's the start. Is it like start and how many to go, or is it start and end? I always got confused.
No, that's to get back the numbers. But if you want the actual row number, so what you're describing works fine for getting back rows, 20 through 30.
Why do you need the row number?
But if you want the row number to show it on the page, good luck, my friend. It was nasty. It actually, I think I closed the page immediately. I was afraid it was going to break my computer.
Yeah, I would figure that out in code.
It was bad. It was really bad.
I actually used to have a code a long time ago when I first started where I would actually it dealt with MySQL or SQL Server, so it's my own custom ORM, and I would actually if it's MySQL, then do the limit. If it's SQL Server, do the top.
Yeah, but I mean, where Alan was going with that though, he didn't. I don't feel like he did it just because he started to go off when he just started to say like when SQL Server introduced the row number function. So really, what he was talking about is the ranking functions that were added into SQL Server,
the windowed functions.
Oh man, I feel like this is getting back into like, well, why am I doing intersects again? Like, because then you get into row number, you get into rank, you get into dense rank, quartile. It's like, wait a minute.
Hey, we've made some magic happen with some dense rank and some row numbers.
Yeah, but like when okay, so there's row number, there's rank, there's dense rank, and there's intile, right?
Yep.
You definitely need to Google that every time you use it.
Dude, I love me some dense rank.
Yeah, I mean, like seriously, we can put a link in the show notes to this one though, because Microsoft has documentation specific, obviously for SQL Server, where they describe the purpose of the 4 different ranking functions, and it's just gross. And as Alan has mentioned, there have been some times where you need some of that magic. And so you sprinkle a little bit of that fairy dust on your code, and then magic happens, and you're like, "Wow, thank you! Unicorns are flying everywhere."
Like, please, maybe make me never have to change this again.
But just know that you just sold your soul to that little troll underneath the bridge, and he's waiting for you because you're going to have to go back across that bridge to get home.
Yeah, if you ever have to look at it again, you will literally have to reread exactly what you did in the first place. So let's move on to the next one. What VarCar versus MVarCar?
Yeah, who put that in there?
Well, no, wait a minute. Now, if we were talking, hold on. So I want to go back to when you guys corrected me earlier, because if we were talking about the data type,
right?
Would you say car or would you say char?
I said car.
Car. Really?
Car.
Do you say character? No, hold on. Do you say character or character?
Well,
what does car stand for?
That's the thing I got here in. It's a char. I don't know. Okay, whatever. Well, that backfired. Moving right along.
I was wondering where you're going with that because it didn't support anything you were trying to get.
Well,
no, because forget it.
So I feel like I've actually looked this up 1,000 times, and thankfully Stack Overflow exists now, so you can kind of get the canonical answer. But I feel like every time I read it, the answer is basically like, "Well, you really should use VarCar," but no one does.
We're going back to the database topic.
So VarCar can store Unicode is basically the deal, which is important if you need it, but it just seems like most applications I end up working with don't need it, which is kind of weird, I guess. Sticking to the USA or something, but
yeah, if you're working in English only, then VarCar is enough.
America.
But the reason why most people don't use VarCar is because it eats up twice the space.
Right.
So,
But VarCar is already variable, so it's pretty good about space, right?
Well, but it depends on the character sets that you're going to be writing in there, though. So if you needed to support internationalization,
You have to have in VarCar.
then it's not up for discussion.
Right. But
You
every
use
character,
VarChar.
but every character stored in an VarCar eats up twice the space.
Right.
So yeah, I mean it's decent on space because it's variable, thus the V. But if you don't need in VarCar, you shouldn't use it.
Yeah, I think like VarCar is probably the most common data type in databases.
Yeah.
Well, because we're all lazy and we don't want to type in one
Right.
extra character.
And that's
Oh,
right.
and you'll know it if you accidentally do car and you end up with all this white space because it's a padding.
You mean char?
Yeah. Only use car if you're using one character. All right. Yeah, that might not be the right thing to say, but whatever. The next one we were going to talk about were GUIDs as keys. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, it's really convenient. And if you've ever worked in a database in dev and a database in production, and you end up having some sort of status ID, and in your code you're like, if status ID equals 5, maybe you're being good pulling it from a config file, and then you go and you insert that data into production, and lo and behold, that 5 is now an 11. So it's 5 on dev, 11 in production, and it's just nasty. So it's a pain. And you don't really run into that problem when you dealing with GUIDs.
However, the problem with GUIDs is they don't sort. There's no sortable thing on them. So if you have your GUID as your key, you basically have your data in all kinds of random order, and so all your queries are way more expensive.
Yeah, and it's also a large data type. What is it, like 32 bits, or I don't even know. It's really big.
Yeah, I think it's a 16, right?
Yeah, it's much bigger than an integer.
Yeah,
in any case.
they're pretty massive. But there is a new feature in SQL Server that is a sequential GUID.
Yeah, but what's kind of what I don't like about that is that the sequential aspect of it makes it very predictable. So if you're trying to use a GUID, and you probably shouldn't be using a GUID as for obscure reasons anyway, but it's not really much better than just using integer as far as obscuring data. And what I'm talking about when I say obscuring your data is if you've ever had an application where you've got like user ID, and you go in there and you change that 13 to 111, now you're somebody else. So it just kind of gross to me when you can see numbers there because it's actually leaking information about your application. So if you know your user 1,000 and you just signed up, then it's a pretty good indication that whatever you just signed up for has less than 1,000 actual users.
But it also goes back to Joe's example with 5 becoming 11.
It wouldn't happen here because your GUID's also based off your machine information. So it's off the time code, but it's also based off I don't know if it's a machine name or what. So they'll be unique between
depends on
systems.
how the data's getting in there, though.
But
I mean, in the example that he provided, though, he was using, from a development perspective, he was using one ID, and then he goes to the production, and it's now that the ID for that row has changed.
But that's because
Right.
they were both integer auto-incrementing. But if you had sequential GUIDs, so one that was created in dev and one created in prod, you wouldn't run into that issue. Because the one created in prod will have its own unique signature on it.
Right, which is bad because my GUID in dev is FAA2B, and the
So
one
you
in
wouldn't have
prod
that
is
problem. Right. You'd know that they came from different systems, but you wouldn't run into that collision because the whole idea is like a lookup table, right? Like you have a product type 1 over
Right,
here.
but the scenario that I'm describing, though, would be the problem because they're sequential GUIDs. So, like, if you were expecting this GUID at this one particular position that I'm not going to call out all 32 bits of,
Right.
and you were expecting it to end in 5, and now suddenly, because that one already existed in your production database, now that one's an 11.
Wouldn't happen that way. Because what he's talking about is, so let's talk about like a lookup table of product types or something, right? You've got motherboards 1, CPUs 2. Okay. In production, people have an interface to be able to add rows to that table, right? So the problem he was talking about is you'd have a collision because development, you had your product types 1 through 10. Production, you have those as well, 1 through 10. So now your 1 through 10s don't match up. However, if you have sequential GUIDs, your GUID in development is going to be different than the GUID generated in production. It won't be like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're going to have A, B, C, D in the development one and D, E, F, G in the production one.
which is bad because that means I have to have a config now that tells me different things for different.
But this is where I was saying, like, it depends on how you initially loaded that production data, though.
But anything created in production would be unique to production, and anything created in development would be unique to development.
If you exported that data straight out of dev,
It
and
wouldn't
just dumped
conflict.
it straight into production,
Would not conflict with production.
the IDs would match.
On your initial dump, yes.
Okay, and now
If you create a
now
production.
go to Joe's scenario where now you're trying to create something, right? And there's some key that maybe for one reason or another it's not there. Maybe you've wiped your dev database. That key is no longer there, right? But that sequential GUID is in the production database, right? That's the scenario that you were describing.
No.
Well, no, I was talking about a situation with basically auto identities where,
Yeah.
I created a new status and dev it's 5, on prod it's 11, and now, my code's looking for 5.
Right.
That's
No.
what I'm talking about, except as represented as a GUID instead of a number 5.
No, but that's what I'm saying. The GUID signatures will be different in the two environments. Dev will always be, you'll know that the dev ones came from dev, and they will never be able to clash with the ones in production. Unless you change your
it depends
dev
on
one.
how the data got into dev, and that's why I keep saying, like,
that's-
because you're saying, like, if the GUID was generated the first time, and a GUID that's generated in dev would never generate the same one in production, is what you're saying.
Oh, you're trying to say
And I'm
that,
saying that that's not the case. Let's say that the data was loaded, right?
I don't know
Because it's sequential. Because there's sequential. If you ever tried to have anything, if you ever had a scenario where you
You're
had to
saying it
insert something
seeds
into
it.
the middle,
I
right?
don't know if you can do
That's
that.
where I'm saying the problem would become.
I don't know if you can do that.
Well, that's
maybe-
actually a big problem with GUIDs is if you have them as a clustered index, which deals with basically how the data is stored on disk, and you're inserting records with new GUIDs, and these GUIDs are basically random numbers, then you're constantly shuffling the data around on disk in order to put those inserted values in if they're not sequential. If they're
Yeah.
sequential, it'd be always just pop it on the
Well, I
end.
wasn't even referring to it from a performance point of view, but I was just saying, like, if you're trying to you can't put something in the middle because the other ones are sequential. Whereas in your dev example,
it won't be ordered.
it may have it might not have been the middle on that one at that point in time,
Right.
but
But you could
your
turn
ID would
identity
change.
off and then insert it and then turn it back on.
Well, right. And that's
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
don't do
It
that.
depends on how you got the data into that other system to begin with, right?
Yeah, I don't know how that'd work. We'd have to do some testing on that. But yeah, it's generally speaking, I don't think GUIDs are great as your key column.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. The one thing that's nice is for distributed systems, or really just in code too. Like theoretically, you can generate those GUIDs in code and kind of throw them up there. But I just I don't trust it. I know that that's a 16 byte number. It's really huge. If I generate 2 GUIDs in a row, those are supposed to be different. But I just can't trust it. It drives me crazy.
Yeah. All right, so we beat that one up. Parameterized queries. This
Do
is
it.
something important for pretty much anybody. If you're writing application code, you need to use parameterized queries. Period. End of story. Or you're calling procs. One of the two. But the whole reason is one, security, and two is speed. In a lot of cases, RDBMSs will cache query plans, and they do better with a parameterized query. I think newer databases have actually done a better job of doing performance on non-parameterized queries, but a parameterized query basically says that you're not going to be able to hack your database all that easily. So you definitely want to use that. We also spoke about that in the OWASP episode. So
That was episode 4.
Yep. And that's codingblocks.net/episode 4.
yeah, so go check that one out. But you should absolutely be using that.
Yep. And we really talked a lot about kind of SQL tips for developers. But coming from the other way around, actually, person we mentioned earlier, SQL Chris, asked us for any sort of coding tips for a SQL guy. And so we started, talking and thinking about that a little bit. And, I think that's a really good question. So if you are, if your DBA friend asks you what they should try doing or learning about in order to get started with coding, then what should they do?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for what they should do.
Yeah, I thought about a couple different things. At first it was really kind of weird. I started thinking about PHP just because it's so good at popping data out of a database and throwing it onto a web page. So if you just want to kind of create a quick data-based application, then that's a good way to do it. And you get to leverage your SQL knowledge, and it probably will feel somewhat natural to you, which I never thought I would say about PHP.
Well, when I originally saw the question, though, usually, and I don't know if this is the case for SQL Chris, but I know for a lot of DBAs that I've known in the past, because of the nature of their job, especially from like when they walk in day one on a brand new project, and they need to get the customer's data into a brand new database, then quite often languages like Perl are their best friend that they have known well, because they need to manipulate text and put it and take it from one format, put it into another in order to get it into that database the first time.
That's an interesting take.
Yeah, it's funny when I'm importing data in SQL Server now. A lot of times I'll use Sublime because it's got a really nice regex support, and so I'll kind of throw the data in there, and then I'll run my little regex to clean it up a bit before I throw it in the database.
But now, with that said, though, in this being 2014, would you recommend Perl to somebody? Is like,
Well, I actually replied to him on this, and I said if I were going to try and do this as a SQL guy, I think the lowest barrier to entry goes back to what we mentioned on our last episode. Do some JavaScript. So I mentioned look up a Node tutorial because they're real easy to get started with. And then without having to know a lot about language specifics, library, like, you don't have to know about system libraries and all the goodies that .NET or Java or any of those give you. You basically have a fairly simple programming language out of the box that you can get started with. And Node's really powerful. So that was kind of my thing, was if you want to get started with the lowest barrier to entry, probably something like a Node.js would get you going.
Yeah, and there's a couple, I can't speak to like how well they are, but there's some SQL builders for JavaScript, but yeah, I mean, at least with Perl though, I was thinking like you could actually not, you could take something that well, like a database, and you could actually interact with it programmatically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, crossing those paradigms is a lot harder for SQL guys coming to programming versus programming coming to SQL. I've noticed. Like most SQL guys don't really want to play with coding that I've seen.
So, I don't understand that.
Yeah. So, a real quick break here. Again, if you guys are listening, you're enjoying the show, please do go leave us a review on iTunes. Click the 5 stars, leave us a line, tell us how you think we're doing. And
yeah, we definitely appreciate the written reviews. If you take the time to write us that review, we greatly appreciate it. And we'll even do you the favor of giving you a shout out on the show. Feel free to drop us a line. You can hit us up at comments@codingblocks.net and tell us your preferred form of shout out.
Yep. And I'll even record Michael doing the happy dance if you leave a really nice review.
We will send you a great GIF.
Yeah, a GIF.
I'm going to go ahead and go on record as not accepting that. So like if that does happen, if you do get that, just know that was videoed against my will. I did not sign up for that. There was no consent given.
Oh, that's awesome.
Awesome.
All right, so we're nearing the end here, but I think we would be very remiss if we did not speak about performance of SQL.
Yes.
So
the answer is yes.
Yes.
You should have performance.
You should have performance. And how do you have that performance exactly in SQL?
Oh, we're gonna get complicated.
Do you just get to write queries and be happy? Is that it?
Yeah, whatever entity spits out. That's generally.
It's tough because like SQL
ignore the man behind the curtain.
That's not a good answer.
Well, it's like a SQL. SQL Server at least is not really known for being very scalable. So I think the more you can get out of the database, as in like you're not going to the database for it, then probably the better. Like doing stuff like caching or trying to stick it in more appropriate data stores, like we talked about, like Solar or something like that for certain types of data. Then that's how I usually approach performance. But I know that's not exactly what you're going for.
I've never heard that it's not that scalable as far as performance. I know it doesn't scale horizontally as well. But
well, that's what I mean. Yeah. I mean vertically it only goes so far, right?
Yeah, but it's actually a pretty fast thing. But so in order to make your queries faster, there's this little thing called indexes that you need to be aware of, and pretty much every database on the planet supports them in one form or another, at least relational databases. And at least in SQL Server, I haven't investigated all the different database servers, but you've got clustered indexes and you have non-clustered indexes. And this is also probably one of those interview questions a lot of people get hit with, and even the people asking the questions a lot of times have no idea what they're asking. A clustered index basically stores the data sorted in the table for you. So if you create a clustered index on a table, and you can only have one in SQL Server, then you create what's called a clustered table. And that basically means the data will be sorted by the columns that you chose. So if you have an employee ID, then if you select out of that table, it's going to, or when those rows are written to the database, it's actually going to put them in order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are going to be on the hard disk in that order. Now, the interesting thing about this that probably a lot of people don't know, if you actually have a clustered index on a SQL Server table, if you do a select from that table, it automatically comes out ordered for you, because that's how it's pulling it off the disk. That's how it's stored on the disk. So you'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for your employee IDs. So then that takes you to non-clustered indexes. And essentially what this is your data is stored, or a non-clustered table. If you have a table that does not have a clustered index on it, your data is stored in a heap. And it typically stores it in order, but it's not guaranteed. So it'll write it as it comes in whatever order it came in, but you're not guaranteed that you're going to have employee 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that order stored on the disk. It could do 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to find some space for number 50 right in between those, and that's where it's going to squeeze it. So that is a non-clustered index table, which means it's a non-clustered table.
It seems to me like the clustered index is almost always the primary key.
Yes, typically speaking.
And the only example I can think of where it's not is if you've got a primary index, or primary key that's a unique identifier, and you don't want that to be clustered because of, it's storing it in order on the disk and having to reshuffle all of that.
Now, here's one of the situations where talking about the GUIDs we did earlier as a key really stinks. If you make a GUID a clustered index on your database, it's trying to sort garbage. Like, your GUID, by its very definition, is random for the most part. And so it's now having to figure out where to sort this stuff, and it's really not a meaningful sort. So when you do that, you're creating a lot of overhead on every insert into the database, because it's having to resort that data in the table and shuffle records around. So if you are using a GUID as your key in your table, you probably should not create a clustered index on that.
Now, here's when you know that you're ready for a beer. Okay, this is the beer test. When your queries involve you having to create your own index on the fly for results in a temp table,
right? You,
my friend, have earned a beer,
and we've all been there, or we have.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's times where it happens where, like, because we mentioned the CTEs earlier, and that's if you're going to do it in memory. But, there's also times where you want to be able to reuse that result over and over and over. So then you would write it out to disk in a temp table. But, that's often the case where you would want to create that index on the fly, as part of your overall set of queries in order for you to get to the end result.
Yeah, and they can be extremely useful even in that temporary situation. I mean, they could mean the difference between pulling back your records in 0 seconds and in 5 minutes, right? I mean, they can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, indexes are huge.
And so getting into a non-clustered index, essentially that is not stored in place in the table. That's stored outside in another location, but it points, if you have a clustered index on the table, then that location gets stored in each one of the indexes. If you don't have a clustered index on there, then it's just going to try and point to the actual location of the data in the tables. And non-clustered indexes can be incredibly fast. You don't necessarily need a clustered index in every situation to get to that data. But a non-clustered index is your way of not sorting data in the table, but being able to point to it in a sorted manner outside the table. And so it's a fast lookup.
So what's a filtered index?
Yeah, these are, I don't know if these are new in 2008. So these are kind of cool. So in the olden days, when you created an index, you indexed every record in the table. In a filtered index, if you know you're only going to be searching for a certain subset of data, you can create what's called a filtered index that will only index that certain subset of data. So if you have a table that has 80 million records in it, but you know you're only ever going to be hitting these 1 million records, you create a predicate on the index create, and so only those 1 million records will be indexed.
Okay, so maybe I could like index only the records created in the last year or something like that.
Exactly. And so when you're using your where clause to pull all the records within the last year, it's going to hit only that subset of data. So your speed is going to be way faster. So that's pretty interesting. Another thing, here's the downside. You can create a ton of indexes and you don't even know if they work, right? I mean, generally speaking, I'd say a lot of people who learn about indexes are like, oh, well, I search on this field, I'm going to create an index for that.
Yeah, why don't you just index every field?
Right. So there's a couple things to know about indexes. Is the query optimizer, at least in SQL Server, will use one per table. So creating a separate index for every field in the table is not going to help you, generally speaking. If you know that you are searching an employee table by first name and last name all the time, then you'll create a composite index on that includes both first name and last name. And then when you search, it can index very quickly and return back what you need. Well, the only way to really know whether or not that's working for you is obviously it's going to come back faster. But in SQL Server and the Management Studio, you can look at what's called the execution plan. And if you see an index seek, then you know your index is working. If you see an index scan, you're basically doing a table scan, except on a narrower table, essentially. I'm trying to think if there's, I don't know, anything. Just creating indexes blindly is not going to help you. You need to know what your queries are, what you use your where clauses on, what you use your join predicates on, and that's typically what you're going to create your indexes based off of.
Yeah, and there is overhead associated with indexes, so it's really fast for pulling stuff out when you use that index, but every time you insert, you've got to kind of pull out that data and throw it in the heap.
Yeah.
What about fill factors?
I've seen that show.
You
eat all the gross stuff.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So the fill factor, I think the default in SQL Server when you're creating an index is 80, but all that means is it going to reserve any space for updates to this data? If you make a fill factor of 0 or 100, it's the same thing. It basically says, no, use up all the space on the row. So generally speaking, if this is data that's not being updated, if this is data in a report table, let's say, that really never gets changed, you can make the fill factor 100 or 0 on the index, and that means that you're not going to waste any space. That index is going to be as efficient and lean as possible. If you make it a fear factor of 80.
Yeah, I got you,
Yeah,
right?
you did.
I got you.
Showing your age there, outlaw.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
So if you make it a fill factor of 80, that means basically leave 20% of room on this. So if you update data in the table, if your first name all of a sudden got bigger for some reason, then it has space to update that index and point it back to that record without having to rearrange those records in the table, or the index wherever it's being stored. So if you are changing data a lot and you have indexes on the table, you probably want to leave that fill factor open for a little bit of wiggle room. If it's a reporting table to where that data never changes, just 0 it or 100 it and you're good to go. All right, and I think we have pretty much just exhausted a lot of information on databases here. All right, so resources we like for this particular episode. I've actually got a few that I want to mention. I'm getting into AngularJS development a little bit late to the game, but, I figure they've had time to perfect things now.
I mean, it's been 4 weeks. So
Yeah. But I figure they've had time to really perfect it, and there is some interesting stuff here. So the first one that I want to mention that I've tweeted out actually through Coding Blocks and also mine is AngularJS. There's a guy, it is Art and Logic, and he had 3 articles that he wrote for things that he's been doing wrong a lot in AngularJS and the ways to fix it. all the way from file structures to where to put your logic and how to separate out your controller information and not mix in DOMs. So excellent articles. So I highly recommend those. I'll have links in the show notes. Another one is Angular-app. This is literally not a tutorial. This is a baked app that is put up on GitHub that if you want to take a look at how it should be structured and how authorization and authentication happens, this application is there. You can actually go through it. You can compile it. You have to use Node, Node.js, Karma, and Bower. And I had the thing up and running in no time. Like, it probably took me 15 or 20 minutes to have the whole thing running. So definitely a nice resource if you really want to see how it should be laid out and an app that's running both server and client-side code. It's not a tutorial. It's just code there. And then the third one that I want to bring up is there was an excellent article on medium.com, and I'll leave a link to this as well. But it was getting just strictly into the authentication and the authorization part of AngularJS, because with a lot of the UI layers now for the web, most of your code is exposed because it's all JavaScript. And with tools like Google Chrome, Firefox's, Firebug, even IE's debug tools, you can go in and manipulate every little piece of JavaScript that exists. So with that, it's very important that now more than ever, you also do server-side authentication and authorization on pretty much every call that's coming through. And this guy laid it out beautifully. The only thing is he doesn't describe all the files, like where the code goes. But I'm assuming if you're comfortable with Angular and you're trying to get a foot up on this kind of stuff, this will be a great article for you. So I'll leave a link to that as well.
Yep. And I wanted to mention a site called usetheindexluke.com. And I actually thought this was a blog.
You didn't say it right.
Hey, use the index, Luke.
Luke. Use the index, Luke.
And it's got a great little graphic on the site, too. But I actually thought this was a blog until recently. And it turns out it's actually just a book. So, and I'm sorry. I have a correction. They actually have a blog, too, that I've not been subscribed to. So it looks like I messed something up there. But anyway, if you go to usetheindexluke.com, it is an online book, and there's also a paper or digital version you can buy. It's in English, French, Dutch, a few other languages, and it just got really nice in-depth information on SQL in general. So it actually has little kind of like takeouts there for specific platforms like Oracle or SQL Server, but it's got chapters on indexes, on joins, and it's just really in-depth, but it's also concise information. So there's not a lot of fluff here. It's just great information.
Their little character there looks like a cross between E.T. and Yoda and a taco.
It's not a graphic you're going to forget ever. It's definitely very interesting.
Why is the taco holding a lightsaber?
There's a Reddit that's pretty much dedicated to tacos and lightsabers, I'm sure. But also there's this really cool...
There's about to be if there isn't already.
There's a 3-minute test that you can take that'll kind of let you know how you stand on SQL performance. And it's got some tough questions, but you choose your database, MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, and it's got some pretty tough questions. And it took me to the mat. So you guys should go there and try it. We'll have a link in the show notes.
Very cool.
I think Alan's taking it right now.
I was looking. Yeah, I actually clicked start. Sorry about that. All right, I'm back. So there was one funny that Outlaw found this week that I don't even know why I'm talking about it because he should get credit for this. There's HTML9 responsive boilerstrap.js.com. If you really want to take a break and you're over all these bootstraps and boilerplates and angulars and embers and all that.
Basically, if I could read from the summary of it, I think this would
please do.
Describe it best in regards to HTML9 responsive boilerstrap.js. It's a flexible, dependency-free, lightweight, device-agnostic, modular, baked-in component framework MVC library shoelace strap to help you kickstart your responsive CSS-based app architecture backbone kitchen sink Tweety Birds. So
that's straight from the site.
That's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah, I think this is hilarious though. I mean, it's available on GitHub. You can download it if you need to. And but like of the frequently asked questions, my absolute favorite was in regards to like how do you install it. And you just attack clone the grit repo, push merge, then Ruby gem, the lymph node, JS, Shawana on a module, and presto.
It's a gold mine, especially if you've been digging through trying to find the perfect responsive stuff. It's a nice break.
Yeah. All right, so with that, let's get into the tips of the week.
Yeah, and I got a doozy this time, so just discovered this.
So you go last.
Okay. Oh, come on, I'm dying here. I am chomping at the bit to get
All
this
right,
out there.
so
The
Alan,
universe
you had
needs this.
something. What was yours, Alan?
No, I got to hear this one because I'm actually more excited about his than I am mine.
All right, fine.
I get 2 tips of the week for this one. It's so good. I'll use it next episode too. But SQL Fiddle.
Why not? Alan has.
Hey, ease up off me.
So you've probably seen JS Fiddle around there. It's a nice little website that will let you send JavaScript to other people. Like if they're asking a question, it's a nice example that's actually working. They can run it and see what it does. They can mess with it. You can send it to other people. SQL Fiddle is the same thing. So on one side, you have an area where you create your schema. You can create tables in your database server of your choice. You can insert some data, and then on the right, you have your query. So like if someone wants to see an example of maybe that, like the tree structure that I was talking about with the 0 to 100 and whatever with the manager's employees, you can actually write that out in a SQL Fiddle, save it and send it to someone. They could run queries, kind of experiment with it, and it's just really cool.
Yeah, I about lost my mind when you showed this to me because my first question was like, well, what database servers do you use? He's like, well, MySQL. And then you go up there, there's a drop down, and you can choose from 12 different servers. So like Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really cool. And so, like, if you got a little SQL script, you can probably do this a lot easier. You can, test your updates and stuff right here easier than you can create a backup, run it, see if it worked, restore the backup, try it again. If you got something weird you need to do.
Yeah, that one's awesome. So I guess on to mine.
So you don't test your query in production? What?
Who doesn't do that?
I'm sure you've been in a situation where you've like nuked some data in your dev database and you're like, oh great, I gotta figure out how to fill this back in so I can try it again.
Yeah,
Not today. not before lunch.
That's why you should always write your where clauses first.
Yes. Oh man, we've all been there. All right, so my tip of the week are object initializers in C#. Many of you will know what these are. Those who don't may end up loving this. So an object initializer is when you go to, rather than calling a constructor, so if you have a class that has a ton of properties, the old school way of doing that is for every permutation that you can think of for creating this an instance of this class, you would create a ton of different constructors. Well, nowadays in C# you don't really need to do that. You create a default constructor, and it has to be public. If it's not public, this will fail. But you create a default constructor that will have some piece of
Destructor. Those are the days.
Yeah, that's rough. Some pieces of implementation in there that you need to have happen. And then when you call your initializer, it's basically going to be a new instance of the class, and you're going to do the curly braces. And then you basically just set what you want those member variables to be equal to. It will call the base constructor first, and then it'll set up the initialization members for you. And that's it. So it's real easy. Instead of having a bunch of different constructor signatures, you can just have one that does the meat of your work and then just pass in the member variables that you want set. So we'll have a link up there. But, for people who aren't aware of it, that will save you a lot of time in creating constructors just redundantly.
Yeah, so with that, I have 2 I'm going to mention, both keeping in the theme of this episode. So we mentioned previously in part 1, poor man's T-SQL formatter, so I thought that deserved to be mentioned as a tip of the week. So if you are a fan of Notepad++, poor man's T-SQL formatter is a plugin that you could apply there, and as we mentioned, you could take your query from anywhere else, plug it in there, format it, and it'll make it all nice and pretty for you. Obviously, you're not going to be able to query it from there, but it's a nice way of formatting that consistently if that's something that your OCD requires that you do.
and without using an online tool, so that you don't know if people are stealing your SQL.
Yeah, yeah, especially if you don't have the bankroll to buy the Redgate tools.
Right, they're pricey.
So I felt that one deserved. But the other one I wanted to mention too is that if you aren't already using it, is the SQL Profiler tool that comes with SQL Management Studio, and that's a great little tool you can run alongside your app if you're trying to debug, especially for like a brownfield application. If you're just trying to trace it to see like, well, how bad is this thing before I get started into it, right? And you can just kind of see what that application's doing. Also, there's a ton of different uses for it. You could see like, well, how bad did entity make that query? And you can see. So it's a great little utility for actually being able to see the queries that are happening as they happen. You can see it from not just a statement point of view, but stored procedures that are getting called, things like that. So it's a great tool.
A quick tip on that is if you are using SQL Profiler in a production environment, you probably don't want it to write to tables on that server, because it is going to eat up a ton of I/O. So you'll want it to set up to write to your local file system for the SQL trace.
Yeah, I guess I should have mentioned that, because I was really thinking that you would use this locally, not on a production server.
Well, you use it locally, but you might be pointing to your production server.
I'm sorry, to connect to a
yeah.
I wasn't thinking that you would use it to connect to a production database.
Yeah,
come on now.
Dude, why else does it exist?
How long you been in this industry and you've never seen this used on fraud?
I'm not saying that people don't do it. I'm just saying like what I was thinking when I wrote it.
Okay, so from his standpoint, he's just running code and seeing what comes out without having to trace through every step of the code.
Oh yeah, me too.
But if you ever do run into a problem where like you just can't reproduce it because you don't have the same level of transactions in a development environment, this is the tool that you use, right? I mean, what else are you going to do unless you have the bankroll again to get something like oh man, I can't even think of the program. SQL
Sentry.
SQL Sentry is one. There's some other tools out there, but even then, Profiler will take it a step further, and you get to see everything.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you couldn't. I'm just saying that from a developer's point of view, when I decided to mention this as the tip of the week, I was really intending it to be used from a development point of view in a development environment.
Nice CYA. That's
if you want to connect this to your production system, that's at your own risk.
Yeah, fair enough.
So with that, we'll be putting all the links in the show notes that will be available at codingblocks.net/episode 13. Subscribe to us on iTunes.
No. Episode
I'm sorry, 14. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So www.codingblocks.net/episode 14. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app. And be sure to give us reviews. We really appreciate those. Those go a long way to helping new listeners find us.
And us help people become better programmers, hopefully.
Oh, well, I wouldn't go that far.
Okay, well.
Yeah, I just took that SQL performance quiz. I'm not helping anybody on SQL.
Oh, really? Did you take it?
Yep.
What? You don't want to check?
I got 5 out of 5, but it was hard, so.
All right. So like I was saying, if you could give us a review, we would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, where are we at? So visit us at codingblocks.net, where you can find the show notes, examples, discussions, and more.
Yeah, and send us your feedback, questions, and rants and comments to comments@codingblocks.net. And make sure you follow us on Twitter.
All right, that's a wrap.